Have you ever really thought about the U.S. Constitution? I mean, not as some old piece of parchment locked away somewhere, but as the actual operating system for an entire country? Because that's exactly what it is. So let's dive into this incredible blueprint for a nation. You know this quote from James Madison? It gets right to the heart of the whole thing. The framers had this huge problem. How do you create a government that's strong enough to actually do things without it becoming so powerful that it steamrolls everybody's rights? They needed a system that could, believe it or not, police itself. And the main architect behind that wild idea was this guy, James Madison. His real stroke of genius was realizing that if you set up a government where different groups are naturally in competition, pitting their ambition against each other, you could actually design a government that keeps itself in check. That idea became the bedrock of the whole system. So yeah, the Constitution is a blueprint, and its preamble, that famous first paragraph, it's like the mission statement. It lays out all the goals, things like keeping the peace at home and defending the country from any threats. So let's take a look at how that blueprint is actually put together. Okay, first things first, you have to understand the core structure. The framers were smart. They didn't put all the power in one place. Instead, they split it up among 3 separate branches, basically creating the engine that makes the whole government run. Let's start with Article I, which sets up the legislative branch. You know it as Congress, the House, and the Senate. Their job sounds simple, but it's huge. They have all the power to make our country's laws, period. Then you've got Article II, the executive branch. This is headed by the president. The president isn't just the commander-in-chief. They also take an oath to faithfully execute the laws. So what does that mean? It means their main job is to carry out and enforce the laws that Congress passes. And rounding out the trio is Article III, the judicial branch. This creates the Supreme Court and gives it the ultimate judicial power. Its job is to interpret the laws and this is the big one, to interpret the Constitution itself. They're the referees. What's really interesting is how they designed the executive branch. The framers actually thought about giving the president a formal advisory council, but they shot that idea down. Alexander Hamilton argued it would just be a clog, something that would slow everything down. So instead, we got the cabinet, a group of advisors the president picks themselves. And this perfectly captures a tension that's been there from the very beginning. Even without that formal council, presidents have always had to wrestle with this massive federal bureaucracy. Fast forward almost 200 years from Hamilton, and you have President Jimmy Carter saying, you know what? Dealing with this thing is way harder than I ever imagined. Okay, so you've got these 3 super powerful branches. How do you stop any one of them from getting too powerful and taking over? Well, that brings us to maybe the most brilliant part of the whole design, the great balancing act we call checks and balances. And believe me, they knew they needed this balance right from the get-go. At the Constitutional Convention, a massive fight broke out. The big states, with the Virginia Plan, wanted representation in Congress to be based on population. But the small states, with the New Jersey Plan, said, no way, every state gets an equal vote. They were completely stuck. The solution was what we now call the Great Compromise. It was a genius move. It created a Congress with 2 houses. You get the House of Representatives, where representation is based on population. That makes the big states happy. And you get the Senate, where every state gets 2 senators, making the small states happy. It's ambition counteracting ambition, right there in the structure of Congress. So let's look at a classic example of how this works in practice. Congress passes a bill. But wait, the president can check that power by vetoing the bill. But it doesn't end there. Congress can check the president right back and override that veto with a 2/3 vote. It's this constant constitutional tug of war, and it's all by design. But make no mistake, this balance is fragile. Just look at this cartoon from 1937. It shows President Franklin D. Roosevelt trying to pack the Supreme Court with extra justices who would support his policies. It was a serious challenge to the power of the court, but in the end, it failed, which proved that the system, when tested, could actually hold. And that checking power definitely goes both ways. In 1952, right in the middle of the Korean War, President Truman tried to seize the country's steel mills to stop a strike. Well, the Supreme Court stepped in and said, nope, you can't do that. They ruled his action was unconstitutional. It was this huge reminder that in this system, not even the president is above the law. Now, the Constitution isn't just a manual for how the government should run. It's fundamentally about the government's relationship with its citizens, and it all starts with those 3 iconic words, we the people. You know, the very definition of the people has grown so much over the centuries. The Bill of Rights set the stage in 1791. But then came the 13th Amendment, ending slavery, then the 19th, giving women the right to vote, and the Civil Rights Act finally banning segregation. The blueprint itself has been changed again and again to include more and more of us. And one of those core freedoms is the First Amendment's right to assembly, which you can see right here in this picture. This isn't just some dusty idea in a book. It's the real, tangible power of people to come together, to protest, and to demand that their voices are heard. But here's a question. Are these rights absolute? Can you just say anything you want, anytime? Well, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. had a famous answer to that. He said that free speech doesn't protect a guy who falsely shouts fire in a crowded theater and starts a panic. And that gave us this idea of clear and present danger, the concept that our rights aren't limitless. And that leads us to a question we are still wrestling with every single day. With all the new threats in the world, how do we strike the right balance between the government's duty to keep us safe and every citizen's fundamental right to speak their mind? That line is constantly being debated and redrawn. This fight for equal protection under the law is also very much alive, and it's often fought one person, one court case at a time. I mean, look at these examples. You've got a woman fighting for equal pay, a man in a wheelchair who just wants to be able to get into a courthouse, women fighting for the right to attend a military academy. Each one of these was a real struggle that helped push the meaning of equality forward. So when you pull it all together, it becomes really clear that the Constitution isn't some static, unchanging relic. It's a dynamic, living document. It was designed for what some have called a perpetual revolution. I just love this quote. It captures the absolute genius of the Constitution so perfectly. The idea isn't to have violent overthrows, but to have a system that can change peacefully, a system that can steadily and quietly adapt to new challenges and new eras without breaking. And that really leaves us with one final big question. The framers gave us this incredible blueprint more than 2 centuries ago. Since then, generation after generation has added to it, tested its limits, and reshaped it. So the question for us, for right now, is what are we going to build with it next?